كل البرايا تنتظر أيامه البيض الغرر كي تستفيد من
الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا. أما بعد، فقال الله عز وجل في القرآن المجيد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم: يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين بالقسط شهداء لله ولو على أنفسكم أو الوالدين والأقربين. صدق الله العظيم وصدق رسوله النبي الكريم، ونحن على ذلك لمن الشاهدين والشاكرين والحمد لله رب العالمين. Respected ulama, elders, brothers and listeners, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The illustrious Sahabi Sayyiduna Abdullah ibn Mas'ud Radhiyallahu Anh once said: كان عمر أعلمنا بكتاب الله وأفقهنا في دين الله وكان إسلامه فتحا وكان هجرته نصرا وكان خليفته رحمة. Sayyiduna Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu, he said about Sayyiduna Umar radiyallahu anhu that Umar was the most well versed in the kitab of Allah, in the book of Allah, in the Quran. He had the deepest understanding of the deen. His Islam, his embracing of Islam was a victory and opening for the Muslims. And his hijrah was also a victory and help and assistance for the Muslims. And his Khulafa, his rule over the Muslims, was a mercy and a rahmah. And from the blessed tongue, the Mubarak tongue of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam described Sayyiduna Umar radiyallahu anhu as one of the muhaddathun, as one of those individuals who in some way or the other is divinely inspired by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his actions. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had also told us about Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu, Inna Allah ta'ala ja'ala al-haqqa ala lisani Umar wa qalbihi, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put the truth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put haqq on the tongue of Umar radiyallahu anhu as well as in the heart of Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu. As we talk about this illustrious Sahabi radiyallahu anhu this afternoon, let us perhaps form a mental picture of this great Sahabi that we are talking about. As is noted in his biographies, Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu was an individual who was very fair in complexion. With this fair complexion, there was a reddish tinge to his face, a reddish tinge to his skin. They would say that Umar radiallahu anhu was bald. They would say that Umar radiallahu anhu would dye his beard with a yellowish color. And it would also be said that Umar radiallahu anhu was strong, he was sturdy, he was firm, and he was an individual who was quite tall, that anybody who would see him would perhaps from a distance think that he is riding an animal, he's riding a conveyance, but in actual fact Umar radiallahu anhu was just naturally tall. The very name or the very title of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu conveys a sense of awe. So the kunya of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu was Abu Hafs. And what does Abu Hafs mean? Abu Hafs means the father of the lion cub. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu was called Abu Hafs, the father of the lion cub. It would just naturally follow that if he was the father of the lion cub, then he can be nothing but a lion, as we can infer from this particular title of Umar radiallahu anhu. But having said that, we all have a stereotypical image of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh in terms of his strength, in terms of his firmness. But as so many incidents in the lifetime of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh bear themselves out, that with this exterior of strength and this exterior of sternness, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh on the inside was an individual whose all of his actions in the spirit of the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was dictated by mercy and compassion. So strength and sternness, definitely the character or the flavor of his personality on the outside. But on the inside, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, no doubt, was a man of great mercy and great compassion. The Islam of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu was as a result, obviously, of the hidayah from Allah, but foresight of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the dua of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the desire to spread and increase the ranks of the Muslims from the heart of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. At one point, before Umar radiallahu anhu had become a Muslim, a particular Sahabi and his wife radiallahu anhum were heading over to make hijrah to Abyssinia, to Africa. And at that particular time, Umar radiallahu anhu had some kind words for this woman who was going out and making hijrah, which was quite surprising. They found it quite surprising because at that point he was the arch enemy of Islam. And the husband of this particular Sahabiya, when she recounts the incident that Umar had these kind words to say to me, his response was, لا يسلم الذي رأيت حتى يسلم حمار الخطاب. That you think Umar is coming closer to Islam. Umar will never become a Muslim until the donkey of Umar becomes a Muslim. This was how he was perceived prior to Islam. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't look at it in that way. Because Umar radiallahu anhu is listed amongst 10 individuals from the Quraysh who were described as of being very high nobility. And whenever tribes would have some sort of conflict amongst them, he would be appointed by his tribe, by his clan, to be able to mediate in these disputes. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw in Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, in one instance, that this was a man with a kind of ingenuity. This was a man which had a special skill set that could be of benefit to Islam. And from there comes the dua of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam for Umar radiallahu anhu. Allahumma izza ad-deen bi Umar ibn Khattab. Oh Allah, honor and give izzah and honor to this deen through the means of Sayyiduna Umar ibn al-Khattab. We look at the qualities of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, we find that he had a unique personality, distinguished qualities that cannot be found easily collectively in a single individual. And Sheikh Ahmad Sayyid, who has written a book on the Ashara Mubashara, he says that if there is one word that he would use to describe Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, it would be this word al-abqariyah. Al-abqariyah, which is, we could translate as ingenuity. That Umar radiallahu anhu was a man who was steeped in a genius of a kind. And this particular word, al-abqariyah, is used for the most gifted of individuals, and an individual who has been created to manage nations and to lead fellow human beings. So, under the wider umbrella of the ingenuity of Umar radiallahu anhu, we look at some particular qualities that stand out in the life of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. Number one, Umar radiallahu anhu is noted for his awe and intuition. His awe and intuition. And just to illustrate this, it's famously known that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says of Umar radiallahu anhu, Umar radiallahu anhu walks in one path and shaitan will take another path. So there was once an Abyssinian slave who was returning with the Muslims from a battle. And she came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and she told Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I took a vow that if I come back successfully from this battle or this campaign, I will beat the duf. I will beat the duf in front of you. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that if this was the vow that you made, if you really made this vow, then you can go ahead. So she starts beating the duf in front of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anh comes after a while, she continues. Some other Sahaba radiallahu anhum come and she continues. And thereafter Umar radiallahu anh comes and immediately she drops the duf and she stops beating. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam tells Umar radiallahu anh, this is what happened. I was here, Abu Bakr radiallahu anh was here, all these Sahaba came and she continued, and here you came and she dropped it. It is, as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him at that point, Shaitan really fears you, O Umar. So natural awe granted to him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and intuition whereby in certain situations, in many situations, he would always choose a particular course of action that would then be confirmed directly by wahi from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second quality we look at is it cannot be cut off. You have to mention the name of Umar and you have to mention this particular quality, which is the quality of justice. And Umar radiallahu anhu was an embodiment of the ayah that I recited at the beginning, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, stand forth firmly for justice, even if it is against your own self. Umar radiallahu anhu, when he came to justice, he was strongest on himself and strongest on his family members. And they would say, when Umar radiallahu anhu was now making a law or a particular rule for the people to be implemented amongst the people, Umar radiallahu anhu would first gather his people of his house, his family, his sons, his wives, etc. And he would address his family. And he told them that now that we are going to implement X, Y, or Z law, the eyes of the people are going to be on you first. And how true is this? That a person in leadership, a scholar, any person with the kind of authority, people will look at how he behaves. So Umar radiallahu anh tells his family, the eyes of the people are going to be on you, just as a bird of prey has its eyes on the meat that it's going to eat. So if you do not obey the instruction, then expect the people not to obey the instruction. But if you abstain, they will abstain as well. Another incident of the justice of Sayyiduna Umar radiallahu anhu. Sayyiduna Umar radiallahu anhu receives a Coptic slave from Egypt who comes to him and presents a complaint to him, and he says that the governor of Egypt, Sayyidina Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu, his son and I were having a race, and I beat the son of the governor in a race, but thereafter the son of the governor started beating me. And he said, do you know who I am? Do you know who is my father? I am from such a noble family. And just on the basis of who he was, we found that I got a beating. So Umar radiallahu anhu summons not only the son who did it, but the father radiallahu anhu as well. And he then gives the whoop to the slave and tells him to whoop just as he whooped you. You whoop him in front of me. And that's exactly what the slave did. And then he told the slave, whoop the father as well, because it is on the strength of the father that the child behaved in that particular way. But he refused to whoop the father. And Sayyidina Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu said that I wasn't aware of exactly what went down here. But then Umar radiallahu anhu said the very famous words that why do you make people into slaves? Why would you be making people into slaves? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or when they were born free, their mothers gave birth to them free, but you are making them into slaves. Never do that. The third quality of Sayyidina Umar Radhiyallahu Anh is he was a man of the akhirah. He was in charge of this vast empire, this vast worldly empire, but he really embodied the concept of zuhd, of abstinence from this world. And the dunya did not come into his heart. They would give a very apt description of Sayyidina Umar Radhiyallahu Anh, that with every victory and more provisions coming into Medina, we would find that the number of patches on his clothes would increase. With every victory, with the increase in material wealth in the ummah, the number of patches on the clothes of Sayyidina Umar Radhiyallahu Anh would increase. And as is famously known, when Umar Radhiyallahu Anh enters into Bayt al-Maqdis, he has no less than 14 patches on his clothes. Umar Radhiyallahu Anh, the next quality is his total fear of Allah, his taqwa. His slave once comes to him, and his slave would bring milk for Sayyidina Umar Radhiyallahu Anh every day. And this particular day, there was something different about the milk. Where did you get this milk? Umar Radhiyallahu Anh asks the slave. And the slave says, today there was some problem. I got the milk from the camels of Sadaqah. And Umar Radhiyallahu Anh says, it would have been better that you give me fire to drink than give me milk from the camels of Sadaqah. His fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the last quality, we look at his concern for those who he ruled under, which we call today servant leadership. The leader is the servant of the people, not the dictator over the people. A woman who had lost her husband complains to Umar Radhiyallahu Anh, my children are suffering. And Umar Radhiyallahu Anh doesn't waste time in that he goes and he amasses possessions and he carries the bag of flour on his own back and walks briskly through the streets of Madinatul Munawwara, and then goes to the lady's house, prepares the food himself, and thereafter feeds this widow and feeds the children. He's concerned for the ummah. Umar Radhiyallahu Anhu, when there was a drought in Madinatul Munawwara, for that entire time, his life and his attitude to life changed. Umar Radhiyallahu Anhu, they would say, he cut off certain ingredients from his life. He would love to eat his meals with butter, but for that entire period, Umar Radhiyallahu Anhu said, I'm cutting out meat, I'm cutting out butter, because I cannot be having a full proper meal when the ummah who are under my control are suffering in a particular way. And the biographers mentioned that Sayyidina Umar Radhiyallahu Anhu, as a result of this change in diet, his complexion actually changed. So concerned was he about the affairs of the ummah and making sacrifice, just like the ummah is going through sacrifice, that his actual complexion had changed. Despite this lofty status of Sayyidina Umar Radhiyallahu Anh, Sayyidina Umar Radhiyallahu Anh always, he feared his final outcome. And the Sahaba Radhiyallahu Anhum would say that we would be reading Salah, and the person in the back, the person right at the back of the masjid, he would hear the intensity of the crying of Umar Radhiyallahu Anhu. He would read Surah Yusuf in Fajr, and when he came to قَالَ إِنَّمَا أَشْكُو بَثِّي وَحُزْنِي إِلَى اللَّهِ, when he presents the complaint to Allah, I present my complaint only to Allah, he cried so bitterly. And one of the great wishes of Sayyidina Umar Radhiyallahu Anhu was expressed in a famous dua. Allahumma arzuqni shahadatan fi sabilik waj'al mawti fi baladi rasulik. Oh Allah, grant me shahada in your way and grant me a death in the city of your Habib Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In commenting on this dua, the ulama say that this was a dua that on the apparent was laden with contradictions. That the jihad was not taking place in Medina. Medina was safe. So how is it that Umar radiallahu anh is asking for shahada in Medina when the battlefields are outside and he is the Amir, is not leading those particular battles in person? So they say that this is Umar radiallahu anh's absolute trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can make it happen. And Umar radiallahu anh is standing in the masjid, and he, at the time of Fajr, he's saying, Aqimu sufufakum, straighten your sufuf. And behind him is a slave, a Persian slave who is unhappy for his own personal disagreement, that he felt Umar radiallahu anh did not attend to his issue, and he was hasty, and he comes in the darkness of the morning and he stabs Sayyiduna Umar radiallahu anh in his shoulder, and he stabs Sayyiduna Umar radiallahu anh in his waist, and he totals 6 wounds across the body of Umar radiallahu anh. And Umar radiallahu anh falls down, and later Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh becomes a shaheed from these wounds. The dua of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the dua that he made to pass away in the city of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, becoming manifested here. We learn from the very limited lessons that we've shared, pointers from the life of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, is Allahumma izza ad-deen bi Umar ibn Khattab. Oh Allah, honor this deen by Umar ibn Khattab. Am I and you a source of honor for this deen? Am I and you a source of honor, or are we, Allah forbid, a source of weakness and disgrace for this deen? Number 2, search out the best for Islam. Search out the best. Benchmark the highest when it comes to the deen. Search out for the best of our children. Search out for the best of our minds. Search out for the best of the lands. Search out for the best of premises, the best of technology that we could use in the correct way. All of this, benchmark it for the deen. Search out the best, as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us. Have a heart that is pulsating with the desire of hidayah, that do not write others off, rather always see that there's potential that a person can be guided, and always ourselves, even if we may be believers, let us be harder on ourselves and take it easier on others. Justice and correct behavior should be implemented ourselves and within our families first, before we even look outside. And also always keep in mind the concern of the ummah. Umar radiallahu anh gave up this and that because of the suffering of the ummah. What have I and you given up in spite of 1.5 years of genocide in Gaza, and more than 12 years, more than 14 years of war in Syria, and the crisis of the Rohingya, and the crisis in Sudan? Am I continuing to live life as normal with the just increasing luxuries, if not anything else? And lastly, we learn the importance of making powerful du'as, not looking whether these du'as are humanly possible, whether it's plausible, but rather thinking about the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whom we call that. I'll conclude with this very briefly. The first in the life of Umar radiallahu anhu. Umar radiallahu anhu was the first to be called the Amirul Mu'mineen. He was the first to implement the Hijri calendar. He was the first, after the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to assemble people in the masjid for Taraweeh Salah, which we fulfill the sunnah of Umar radiallahu anhu. He was the first to patrol the streets of Madinatul Munawwara at night. He was the first to establish provinces, to recruit soldiers, to establish revenue, to establish administrative departments. He was the first to give the punishment of 80 lashes for alcoholic drinks. And he was one of those who expanded Masjidun Nabawi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was the one who expelled the Jews as per the will of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam from the Arabian Peninsula. In his era, Egypt comes under Islam, Damascus comes under Islam, Jordan, Jerusalem, Tripoli, parts of Iraq and parts of Persia all come under the empire of Islam, Sayyidina Ali Radhiyallahu Anh. This is the last thing I'll mention. Sayyidina Umar Radhiyallahu Anh, one of his firsts as well, was he was responsible for lighting up the masjid, particularly in the month of Ramadan. One of his excellent qualities that is remembered is how he lit up the masjid to show honor to the month of Ramadan. Ali Radhiyallahu Anh comes to the masjid once and he sees it brightly lit up. And Ali Radhiyallahu Anh, who had the best of relationships with Umar Radhiyallahu Anh and vice versa, Ali Radhiyallahu Anh says, and we conclude with the same dua, May Allah brighten the grave of Sayyidina Umar Radhiyallahu Anh as he has brightened our masajid, as he has brightened our deen, and as he has spread the light of Islam all over the world. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.